Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, a Pittsburgh Steelers podcast made by fans like you, for fans like you. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. I am your host, Joe Kuzma. I'm by myself. I'm flying solo, and when you do so, you get to call yourself the host. I know Brian didn't want to call himself that. He doesn't quite have the fancy intro yet, but we're working on it. We're going to get it there. So today, I'm the host. Brian was the host and did a just tremendous job on the full 7-round Pittsburgh Steelers draft. If you didn't have a chance to check that out, there's the video version of it that's available on YouTube. Unfortunately, I'm only available in the fireside chat, great-grandparent audio-only version, but don't let that dismay you. I like to think I have a good voice, and it's not that I'm just too ugly for video. Just not quite there yet as far as setup and technology and gear and whatnot, so I'm plain enough to admit that Brian has a nice little setup there. He has his crazy Steelers office with his Rooney jersey and all this stuff that's signed. I mean, if you really saw it, it's a sight to behold. He is quite the guy. But we're not talking about players that are already or were Pittsburgh Steelers. Today we want to talk about players who could become Pittsburgh Steelers here in about a little under a week. The NFL draft's going to kick off. First round, day one, always the big names. I think they have about 22 players who've formally been invited. Some of those names, just like Adoree Jackson, really hoping he was going to fall to like pick 30. He still could. But just seeing that he's being invited, I think he's being heavily targeted by some teams. And that's where I'm kind of at, because there was a lot of hubbub around. Brian has had the mock draft insanity stuff that's just, as we call it, insanity, because it was just crazy. He did trades. He had all of these just wild picks, and he gets to talk about all these different players, just like we did in the Draft War Room book. That we're actually going to put an update out for that, hopefully over the weekend or by Monday. For those of you who checked it out already, thank you very much. For those who haven't, available on everything. It's a Kindle book. It's available Barnes & Noble, the Apple iBooks, just everywhere. Kobo, a few other places too. So we tried to get that out to as many people as possible. And just as far as the ebook format itself and some of the tables and things like that, we have a few patches and updates. So it's going to be filled with a little bit more value added for those of you who already purchased it. So make sure keep an eye out on social media, especially come around the beginning of the week. If you see that there was an update out, you don't get alerted on your device, just remove the book and re-download it, and there should be some other stuff in there, because there's been some pre-draft visitors that were not on our radar. I know one of them was Keon Adams, for example, and I think the Steelers pretty much have their draft board already figured out. And where they're at. They had some visitors. They had 3 of them on Thursday, all of which may not even project to be drafted. So we're talking about like 6th, 7th rounders, college free agents. They released, trying to think of the player's name. I mean, he barely had a cup of coffee. He had a futures contract. And I think they're opening up a few spaces and anticipating bringing some people aboard if they happen to not get drafted by another team. But the Steelers definitely have a focus. I mean, we've been talking about their priorities for quite some time now, and it's very obvious, even just from the meetings that occurred between the Combine, the East-West Shrine Game, the Reese's Senior Bowl, and then, of course, these pre-draft visits. There are some players that have been just in constant contact with them along the whole journey of this process, and there's 2 to 2.5 times more edge rushers. That would be your defensive ends with the hand in the dirt and the guys who don't, the outside linebackers and the 3-4 systems in college that could. Now the defensive ends, of course, they're looking to convert as outside linebackers in the Steelers system when they do make it to the NFL. And there's just a long list of names. I'm going to just plow through a few of these. The official pre-draft visits, we had Tim Williams from Alabama, who myself and Brian aren't necessarily the biggest fans of. We think there's a lot of question marks. Brian likes to think this is a smokescreen. I like to use the same word. There are some different we'll say, people that have been around this team that we have spoken with that don't feel that the Steelers necessarily do this smokescreen thing, but there are people involved with other franchises that say, oh, yes, definitely. You know what, Joe? This is a thing. Teams do this to throw off the scent, because if you knew exactly who everyone, I mean, it's pretty obvious. I'm going to throw one out here, and this is my favorite guy by far. I wouldn't be upset if he was a round one guy. He would be the first ever player drafted in the first round, and even if he goes in the second, the highest drafted player out of Youngstown State University, my alma mater. I've been following them since the 90s when I was a small child. For those of you across the country may not be familiar, this was the program of which Jim Tressel, who may have come to more fame as an Ohio State coach before Urban Meyer took over, this was the program, the 1AA or FCS program, that he led to 4 national championships during the 90s with 6 title appearances. I mean, just they were a juggernaut, and having that just down the street for me was more fun than you could possibly believe. A cheap ticket, and it's just kind of crazy because my uncle had become basically one of the booster club members, and he'd become friends with other guys that were in this, and I had a lot of intimate contact with different players throughout the years, being able to just they drop by. Like, now, tailgate party, I don't want it to sound like it does in the pros. There's not alcohol involved at the college level. The campus is dry. I just want to put that out there, specifically if the tailgate party itself is within one of the campus buildings, of which, if you're a privileged member of these booster clubs, you live the high life. What else can I say? So I got to speak with a lot of these players and meet them throughout the years, and just guys were larger than life even back then, even though it was small college. Well, Derek Rivers from Youngstown State is larger than life. He has the single season sack record regular season for the Youngstown State Penguins. Yes, they're a penguin. It's a weird mascot, but geez, I've seen way stranger. Look up Yeoman, by the way. That's one of them. And banana slugs, of course, for those of you who are Pulp Fiction fans. Derek Rivers could be the highest drafted player ever out of this school. There have been several other players who have made it into the pros, but more or less not very many of them get drafted. Probably the most notable guy ever as a kicker, his name was Jeff Wilkins, and I have a very awkward picture with him. As I said, I got to hang around with these guys, so it's kind of funny. They have this media day, and who takes pictures with the kicker? I do. I even have a Chris Boswell jersey that's signed. It's sitting over here. So Derek Rivers, they have spoken to this gentleman everywhere, and he reminds me of Lamar Woodley, and I am incredibly 1,000% biased that I want him in black and gold. And I think I've convinced several other people, and there are people who watch film that don't know anything. They don't know Youngstown State from, I don't know, like the former Middle Tennessee State or something like that. They don't know the difference. And they're convinced too. And he just reminds me of Lamar Woodley. He always did. I remember watching it. The Penguins themselves played in the national championship game at that level. They play a tournament. It's not like these bowl things or this crazy computer system or whatever, AP poll rankings kind of seeds them or whatever. There's a selection process just like there is with anything else. Think of March Madness on a much smaller scale, but they play like 5 games in order to get there when you don't get a bye, because they expanded this format. It used to be 4 games that they would play, and they expanded this format a little while ago. So I just remember when watching this title game, and they were kind of wore out. They didn't play exactly their best, and just strange stuff if you watch this film. They played James Madison, which is Arthur Mote's alma mater, by the way, and it's just the weirdest things. But I remember watching that, and I'm sitting there with my uncle who knows this team like the back of his hand. I said, "You think Derek Rivers? I mean, he's going to get drafted." Oh yeah, he's going to get drafted. He's going to be a draft pick. I'm like, I wonder how high he can go. And at that time, we didn't know he was going to be this just standout star of the Senior Bowl and crush all his numbers at the Combine. And he's looking more and more legitimate as a top pick all the time. But the question is that people aren't necessarily, honed in on where he's going to go. I mean, this is all guesswork. There are people who think he could go in first round as high. I think I saw somebody as high as like in the 20s somewhere. And then, of course, there are people who think he's going to be like bottom 3rd round, which I don't think there is a chance on this planet. If you follow the work, you follow the things that I write and the things I say, and you haven't skipped or missed anything, I don't blame you if you do. I was talking about the Baltimore Ravens and how they traded Timmy Jernigan over to the Philadelphia Eagles, and they leapfrogged like 25 spots because they swapped whatever, and they have like 2 picks in the 3rd round, I think, and both of those picks are before the Steelers, and the one just like leapfrogged a bunch of teams like the Cowboys and the Packers and a few others that can all be looking for an edge rusher and bolstering the depth of their rosters with a player such as Rivers. So if he were to fall beyond the 2nd round, he's not going to get very far in the 3rd round, at least not where the Steelers, by virtue of playing in an AFC championship game. The only teams that are picking lower than the Steelers were the picks that are allotted, and I say allotted because New England traded theirs to the New Orleans Saints in that Brandon Cooks trade. So it was really the 2 teams in the Super Bowl, the Falcons and then the Patriots, that pick after the Steelers. That's it. That's it. When you are successful, you don't pick early. And those early picks, if you remember what I said about the values of them, they're worth a lot more, and obviously so. I mean, you think about standing on the playground and you're picking teams out of whatever, kickball, basketball, and you're picking the athletes, right? And you're going through, and all of a sudden you're down to like, the dumpy kid that can't even like tie not and you're like, well, do I want him or do, I want you're scraping at the bottom of the barrel, if you get what I mean. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that. There's a lot of quality athletes. There's a lot of things that people get wrong. You just don't know. You don't know how these guys may be like a duck to water. Antonio Brown, Tom Brady, late round draft picks. Richard Sherman, 5th round draft pick. You get guys that are undrafted. Kurt Warner, Chris Harris, the corner for the Denver Broncos. It happens. Trust me, it happens. But for the most part, the educated guesses, a lot of your 1st round picks, they usually get quite a few of them right, unless you're that draft class with Jarvis Jones, and all of them are wrong. That's terrible draft class for the most part. Are you going to take a chance on a small college guy like Derek Rivers? I mean, the Steelers are really, really vetting this guy. He could be the top overall pick. Now, I'm saying edge rusher. I'm saying like an outside linebacker. You need them. Somebody had made a comment, and I won't mention by names. I'm not trying to call somebody out, but I think it's a valid point to bring up that when Brian went and drafted Takaris McKinley and then Derek Rivers in his mock draft, his most recent one, someone had said double dipping at that position was a waste of a 2nd round pick. And I'm thinking to myself that Rivers is going to be a starter. And I'm thinking about Tack McKinley and his shoulder. I think Tack wouldn't be around at 30 if he wasn't going through shoulder surgery. And thus, I've read 4 to 6 months. We're in April. And 4 months would take him into August, and 6 months would take him into October. And if he's not the type of guy to recover, and you still got to get back in football shape, you've got to practice. You see where I'm getting with this. Even if you took McKinley, if you took Tack with number 30, you don't have another edge rusher for the 2017 season. So it's not necessarily a wasted pick if you go back-to-back. And we know, we've been putting out the Take Two articles. We put out how the Steelers double dip, wide receivers, corners, linebackers. They've taken multiple players at the same position within the same draft in the same year. And my comment about McKinley, and nothing against McKinley, is just that he's not going to be healthy. He's not a now player. The Steelers need some now players. That's what we've been harping on against quarterbacks. If you take Tack, he's a future type guy. You got to look at Arthur Moats, Anthony Chiquillo. They have 1 year left. They have this year left. They could be back. But Arthur Moats, as much as I love him, been steady when he does play. Not exactly the answer. And the answer also isn't to allow James Harrison to play 100% of every game throughout the whole season. They get away with that from December on, but he is going to be 39. They're going to have to rotate someone in and out, more than likely a rookie, or Arthur Moats, or Chiquillo. Might happen. And what happens if somebody gets hurt? God forbid. I hate saying that, but somebody gets hurt in training camp like Bud Dupree did last year. You're going to be real thin at that position. Steelers are going for 2 here. I truly think so. They could do it at the corner position. There's somewhere in the secondary, a corner and a safety. I think they're going to load up on defense, and I wouldn't be unhappy with Tack or Derek Rivers, and they've shown a lot of interest in Tack. He's also one of the pre-draft visitors along with Rivers. 2 of the, I'm counting here 5, which I think is the correct. Now, there's some of these people, there's all these reports of people that are coming in. They're unofficial. I'm only going by the ones that are officially reported by the Steelers, and usually that's through Bob Labriola or someone else within the PR department with the team. So if there's like an unofficial visit or a dinner or something that's just kind of speculation, I'm not going by that. Now, they had a lot. At the Combine, you're allowed 60 interviews. I mean, there's a huge list. There's Charles Harris, Carl Lawson. I've already mentioned Rivers and McKinley. Tim Williams, who was also a pre-draft visitor. Another pre-draft visitor, Carol Phillips and Zach Cunningham. They've been doing their due diligence on these guys as well. TJ Watt, Ryan Anderson, DeMarcus Walker, Devontae Fields, Duke Riley, Terrell Basham, Jojo Mathis, Fadal Brown, Tayshawn Bauer, Dwayne Smoot, Connor Harris, and Austin Calitro from Villanova, another small school name to throw out there. They are looking at everybody, but there's only a small amount of these guys that may be around come pick 30. A lot of people think Tim Williams could be there, but Hassan Reddick, we think is another Ryan Shazier. We think he's a guy who is going to project to being an inside linebacker in a 3-4 and is going to be the same exact player as Ryan Shazier. Now, we could be surprised because I think we were all surprised when Ryan Shazier was picked. We could be surprised and get another one. Are they sold on Vince Williams? I can't say yes or no. I like Vince Williams. I think he'll be just fine. I think the need is the edge. Maybe they see one of these other guys will go there and they won't go back-to-back picks on that, which is a fair assessment. They go 4th round, 5th round. We don't know if there's any trades involved. They may pick up some extra picks or trade one of their future picks to move up and into one of these mid-rounds and get somebody that they like. But there are certain players that just will not be available at this position. I mean, obviously, I don't even know that I really need to mention this. Come on, Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett's not going to be there. That's one for sure. And I'm not so sure that somebody like a Derek Barnett or who else is on the tip of my tongue. I'm going to pull up my list here so I could actually tell you. Let's see. We had these all in ranked. Oh, Solomon Thomas, of course. Solomon Thomas he could be more of an edge rusher, outside linebacker. He's good. Not going to be there pick 30. Don't think so. I mean, Reddick's stock was kind of going up there. I think somebody like Derek Barnett, he could be there. I'm just thinking that the Ravens, the Browns, the Bengals, and the Browns and the Bengals and the Ravens, they all have a bunch of draft picks, and the Bengals and Browns both lead this draft with 11 each. You got some inside linebackers like Reuben Foster. Will he drop that far? Will the Steelers show interest in him as an inside linebacker, or are they just strictly looking for outside linebacker? Charles Harris. I am not so sure that I am a fan of Charles Harris or a fan of Carl Lawson. And, a few of these guys, especially Lawson, has history injury. And, I mean, they're strong, they're fast. I'm not exactly sure that over some of the players, like I said, I really like Rivers. And I'm going to put TJ Watt in this category as well. And a ringing endorsement from his brother. Of course, some of the hype saying he's further along than what he was, which could be crazy. And I think having that nepotism, that's a big word there, but basically it means you're related to somebody. A lot of players get by just on that. Could very well be something of that nature. TJ, I mean, he could be one of those guys. Maybe he's somebody that drops into the 2nd round. They go with the corner. So this is exactly what I'm looking at here when I look at this huge list. The guys that they've had visiting. I mean, Cunningham, that's another guy that's really, we're all flapping our gums about Rivers, Watt, Tack, Lawson, Harris. Cunningham, never know. Could be around. Not so sure about Tim Williams. I think I'd avoid Tim Williams. I wouldn't touch him with a 40-foot pole, and that's okay. That's just my opinion personally. I got this incredibly wrong last year. I was totally in the market for Andrew Billings. Then we find out it was just like this well-kept secret amongst NFL franchises that the guy had something wrong with his knee or whatever. Didn't end up playing last year. I mean, the Bengals grabbed him in the 4th round. Don't know what he's going to end up being. Could be a one hell of a steal at that position, but we don't know. I thought he was going to go 1st round. So it just goes to show you we don't know everything, and we're just trying to make some educated guesses with this. But if the Steelers go back-to-back, they could do worse. Some people also thinking money backer or safety, hybrid safety, if it's the money backer type. Maybe that's Obi Melnafu. May have mentioned this on the last show, actually. Budda Baker. A lot of people like Jabril Peppers. Peppers is an athlete, and so that's somebody, I think it's a tough sell. Even Obi. I kind of like Obi. I like Baker. I'm interested to see who goes day one. I guess it's really going to matter how many quarterbacks go. A lot of people discounting the teams are going to be hungry for some offensive linemen. I mean, the Bengals line is just terrible. Are they going to go out and grab, like, if Mike Williams is there with their top pick? Or the Ravens? Are Ravens going to go offense again? I mean, these are teams that could go and grab an offensive lineman because there aren't enough good ones maybe in this draft. There isn't enough depth, and they're still trying to repair these things. I mean, the Bengals lost one side of their line entirely. Zeitler went over to the Browns. They still need to do something with that. The cupboard's bare. The Ravens too. Jeremy Zuta, the center, also no longer there. And I mean they've got some guys that they're trying to work in, but it's still patchwork. Even Cleveland for that matter. Just talking and within our own division. So any of those picks where the Steelers don't have a primary need is where I said I'm going to be celebrating and jumping off my couch whenever I see a wide receiver off the board, a quarterback off the board, an offensive lineman off the board. I'll even say a defensive lineman off the board unless it's one of these defensive ends that projects to being an edge guy. Within reason, I know Myles Garrett's not going to be there. I know Solomon Thomas isn't going to be there, and a few others. I would not be. DeMarcus Walker, I didn't even mention, from Florida State. He's going to be a heck of a athlete as well. Just another one that more than likely may not even go beyond the 20s, to be completely honest. Everybody likes having an edge rusher. They come in at a premium. You got to get after the quarterback. You got to put pressure on the quarterback. That's what's been hurting the Steelers. That's where they're going to go. That's my feelings on this top class. Mark it down. My favorites, I like Rivers. I like TJ Watt. There are some late round players too, like Joe Mathis. We're projecting middle rounds. Wouldn't be a bad pickup there. We're talking about the University of Pittsburgh, local hometown guy like Ewan Price. Thinking maybe he's a little bit shorter armed. There's some studies out there and some research that show that Mike Tomlin doesn't draft, or Mike Tomlin teams, I should say, with Kevin Colbert. They're all part of this process, by the way. So just interchangeable words. I'm not giving Tomlin or Colbert or anybody, Keith Butler, any of these guys direct credit. This is a team process, scouting department, the whole 9 yards. They're going to get this done. They're going to find out who the best guy is. But it's Ewan, Mr. Price, somebody later down the draft maybe, and along with some of these other guys that just head in for a recent visit. So, folks, I say pass on Lawson, pass on Harris, pass on Tack, unless you think, pass on Tim Williams too, unless you think your guy's going to be there in the second round, then go corner maybe, get a top corner. Why not? Still need help there. Ross Cockrell, 1 year left on his deal. They're going to have a slew of guys trying to compete for that nickel corner slot. That would be William Gay, Senquez Golson, Cody Sensabaugh. They have Artie Burns and Sean Davis in place. Mike Mitchell still under contract for a couple years. They could get an heir apparent for him or somebody that plays a hybrid spot. Look at Sean Davis. Played corner and safety. Very much surprised everybody, and he was the Rookie of the Year. He made the all-rookie team. What else can you say about that? So I would be pleasantly surprised if they have another trick up their sleeve such as that. So we're going to stay tuned and see what happens. Brian and myself are going to have a little fun draft thing to do, and then we're going to be covering each day of the draft and the individual picks the Steelers make. But until next time, be safe and be good. We'll catch you later. Don't go crazy over this draft stuff. Take care.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media. and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.